It's always the little things that betray the changes first, the imperceptible tremors that slip beneath the surface of routine. I noticed it before anyone else, though I pretended I didn't. Our home was never quiet, not with my husband's. Endless phone calls from the living room, and the regular clatter of keys and shoes in the hallway. But on the day he announced that his son would be moving in with us, just for a while, the house seemed to pause, holding its breath with me. I kept my face composed, busying myself with kitchen chores, polishing cutlery that didn't need polishing, thinking about the rhythm of our days and how it would inevitably break. My husband's voice was light, optimistic, almost naive, as if this new arrangement could be absorbed seamlessly, a simple addition to our lives. He couldn't see the subtle way my hands shook, nor did he notice how carefully I chose my dress that morning, running my fingers over fabrics, rejecting the safe, worn cotton in favor of something softer, closer to the skin. I told myself it was for comfort, nothing more, but even I could feel the lie settle inside me. He arrived on a Wednesday, the kind of afternoon that hovers between spring and summer. I opened the door and found myself searching for signs of the boy he once was, but instead saw a man, taller than his father now, with a calm confidence, and eyes that paused too long on my face before they slid away. There was a casual intimacy in the way he greeted me, a warmth that made my husband beam with pride and left me feeling suddenly exposed, as if he saw straight through the careful choreography of my days. Suitcases clattered in the hallway, shoes were kicked off, and within an hour our living room was rearranged, not with malice, but with the impatient energy of someone making himself at home. He spoke with a quiet certainty, suggesting a new place for the plant, asking if he could take over the guest room at the end of the hall, requesting almond milk for his coffee. His presence pulsed through the house, different from the routine, noise of my husband's work calls, different from the silence that often followed our meals. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I noticed how the conversation shifted. My husband fell into easy nostalgia, retelling stories from years ago, but his son, no longer a guest, redirected the talk, asking about things I cared about, the books I was reading, my running routes, my garden. I caught myself smiling too, often glancing at the reflection of my own hands as they moved. Were they trembling, or was it only my heart? Later, as I changed for bed, I lingered over my nightgown, debating for too long between the familiar and the forbidden. I settled on something modest, but the act of choosing, the secretive brush of silk against my skin, unsettled me. In the Sayers' bathroom mirror, I saw the faintest flush on my cheeks. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, the heat, a consequence of being too long in a stuffy house. The next morning, he was in the kitchen before I was, grinding coffee beans, with a steadiness that filled the room. I realized, not for the first time, how different the energy was when he was there. I reached for a cup, brushing his hand by accident, and we both froze for half a second. I tried to laugh it off, but the memory of that fleeting contact stayed with me all day. There was an undeniable shift, a quickening, the sense that some invisible line had been drawn. My husband left for work with his usual distracted kiss, not noticing the way my eyes lingered on the man at the kitchen table, the soft lines of his arms beneath his t-shirt, the almost imperceptible smirk when he caught me looking. I spent the afternoon obsessively cleaning windows, baseboards, the hidden corners of the house. But it wasn't the dirt I was trying to erase, it was the growing restlessness inside me. I chose my clothes more carefully, favoring things that made me feel seen, even if no one was looking. I reapplied perfume before dinner, just a hint, testing to see if anyone noticed. No one said a word, but I caught his gaze once, lingering, a moment too long, then slipping away with a practiced ease. That evening, I caught my own reflection in the glass of the patio door, strange, luminous, slightly unsettled. My husband called me to the sofa, patting the cushion next to him, but I hesitated, my attention drawn to the laughter coming from the guest room at the end of the hall. I joined my husband, folding myself into his side, but my body felt elsewhere, hovering between comfort and unease. As the night settled over the house, I lay awake listening to the new rhythm of footsteps in the hallway, the low sound of music, drifting from his room and my own pulse in the darkness. I realized that a boundary had shifted, quietly but irrevocably. I told myself there was nothing to fear, that I was still in control. But even as I said it, I knew something fragile had already begun to crack. When morning came, the tension lingered, thin as silk, barely visible but impossible to ignore. I greeted him in the kitchen, forcing my voice steady, but every gesture felt laden with meaning. The ordinary routines, passing the milk, sharing breakfast, became small acts of negotiation, each touch, each glance, a risk. And as the sun climbed over the roof of our house, I understood that I was waiting. For what, I couldn't say. But I felt it in my bones. This was only the beginning, and even as I tried to anchor myself in the familiar, I could sense the ground, shifting beneath my feet, drawing me, slowly, inexorably, toward something I could not name and could no longer avoid. It's strange how quickly a new routine cements itself, how the oddness of change hardens into something almost comforting. In the first days, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, meals on time, laundry folded into crisp stacks, polite conversation that tiptoed around anything real. But the house itself seemed more alive, as if the walls remembered what it was, to hold a secret. Every room felt subtly rearranged, not just by new furniture or the sound of his voice on the phone in the evenings, but by the silent negotiations between us, the invisible lines we traced and retraced. On Friday morning, my husband left early for an all-day meeting. He barely touched his coffee, just a rushed goodbye at the door, and his absence opened the house up to possibility. I moved slower than usual through my morning tasks, aware of the quiet above me. The sound of the shower running in the guest bathroom sent a flicker of anticipation through my chest. I spent too long picking out my clothes, discarding two perfectly good dresses before settling on a linen skirt and a blouse I hadn't worn in years, something that brushed lightly against my skin. It was impractical for errands, and I told myself I'd change before going out. He appeared in the kitchen while I was still pouring tea. There was nothing remarkable about his entrance, no deliberate posturing or grand gestures, just an easy smile and the smell of soap lingering on his skin. I pretended to be preoccupied, studying the tea leaves at the bottom of my cup, but my heart stumbled as he brushed past me to reach for a glass. The space between us felt charged in a way I could not explain, both safe and wildly dangerous. "I'm supposed to pick up some groceries today," I said, finally breaking the silence. "Your father's list is longer than my patience." I forced a laugh and he grinned. "Want some company?" he asked. His tone was casual, but I heard something underneath, a gentle pressure. I shrugged as if it didn't matter, but the truth was I'd been hoping he'd ask. We drove in my car, windows down, radio humming quietly between us. The city looked different with him beside me, more open somehow, as if every side street and intersection could lead to something unexpected. He pointed out new graffiti on the old brickwork, made a sarcastic comment about the way people park, and I found myself laughing for real. My laughter felt like a muscle I hadn't stretched in years. At the supermarket, we moved in sync, tossing items into the cart, arguing good-naturedly over brands. I caught glimpses of us reflected in the glass refrigerator doors, him leaning in to make some pointed remark, me swatting at his arm, pretending to be annoyed. When we reached the personal care aisle, he grabbed a bottle of almond-scented shampoo and held it up. "This is what I used to steal from your bathroom," he teased. I rolled my eyes, but inside, something loosened, as if we had always belonged in this strange domestic dance. At the lingerie section, I hesitated, feeling both silly and exposed. I needed something practical, but the bright colors and delicate fabrics caught my eye. He noticed, and without missing a beat, reached for a deep green set edged with lace. "This suits you," he said, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. I met his gaze, searching for some trace of irony, but his expression was sincere. My skin prickled with heat. For a moment, the world shrank down to the space between us, humming with unspoken possibility. We paid for our groceries in awkward silence, the moment hanging between us as we loaded the bags into the car. The drive home was quieter, tension gathering like a storm just beyond the horizon. I gripped the steering wheel too tightly, aware of him watching me, but unable to meet his eyes. Halfway home, he reached over and turned down the radio. "Let's stop at the park," he suggested. It wasn't a request. I pulled over without asking why. The park was nearly empty, just a few scattered benches and the distant laughter of children on the swings. We walked in silence, the grocery bags abandoned in the trunk. He led us to the edge of the lake, where the reeds swayed in the wind and the water shimmered with late afternoon light. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside me, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. I felt my own breath quicken, waiting. For something, anything, to break the stillness. "I never thought I'd come back here," he said eventually, his voice quieter than before. "Not like this." I glanced at him, unsure whether he meant the city, the park, or our strange new orbit. My hands twisted the strap of my purse. "It's not easy, is it? Coming back to places that remember you." He smiled at that, a crooked, self-mocking thing. "I think some things are better forgotten, but not all of them." We stood like that for what felt like hours, the air thick with meaning. When he finally turned toward me, his face was open, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. The distance between us collapsed. He leaned in. For a fraction of a second, I could have moved away. I could have said something sharp, pretended not to notice. Instead, I stayed rooted, dizzy with anticipation. His lips touched mine, tentative at first, then more certain. The kiss was not perfect or cinematic. It was raw, honest, hungry, and careful all at once. It lasted only a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat, something essential shifted inside me. We pulled apart quickly, breathless, both of us looking away, uncertain what to say. I felt an electric thrill, shame tangled with desire. The world returned in sharp focus, the noise of traffic, the chirping of birds, the heavy silence between us. On the way home, neither of us spoke. When we unloaded the groceries, I busied myself with the bags, barely glancing in his direction. But I couldn't shake the sensation of his mouth on mine, the way my body had leaned into him, unthinking. That night, after my husband came home, I tried to find comfort in routine. Dinner, a movie, the pretense of normal conversation. But I kept replaying the afternoon in my mind, wondering if he could sense the difference in the way I moved, the way I looked at him. Alone in my room, I pulled the green lace from the shopping bag, holding it up against the light. My hands shook. Not with fear, but with longing. I pressed the fabric to my skin, closing my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt fully awake. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew, without doubt, that I would not be able to forget. Something had begun that would not be stopped, and whatever came after, I would have to face it, no matter how carefully I tried to hide. The day after our stolen moment in the park, I moved through the house with the strange awareness of someone who had crossed an invisible line. Every detail seemed sharper, every sound louder, as if the world itself had been stripped bare. I caught my reflection in the mirror and searched for some visible change, a flush, a tremor, a mark, but there was nothing to betray me except the restless energy that clung to my skin. My husband, as usual, was buried in his work, trailing half-finished conversations from the breakfast table to the hallway, missing entirely the new tension simmering just beneath the surface of our lives. It was Saturday, which used to mean lazy mornings together, but now our household routines overlapped. Without really touching, my husband scrolled through news on his phone, making offhand remarks about politics or traffic as I prepared coffee. I played my part well, responding with the right sounds, but my attention flickered between the doorway and the clock, waiting for the moment when he would leave for the office, or for an errand, or for anything that would remove his presence from the fragile equilibrium that had formed overnight. He lingered longer than usual, sensing, perhaps, some change in the air. "You're quiet this morning," he observed, his voice casual but his eyes searching. I looked up from the mug in my hands, forced a soft smile. "Just tired," I replied. "I didn't sleep well." The lie came easily, and I watched as he accepted it, nodding with the distracted sympathy of someone whose mind was elsewhere. Within the hour, he was gone, leaving the house to the two of us again, although neither of us acknowledged the significance of it. I found my steps carrying me toward the guest room at the end of the hall, pausing before the closed door. The air was heavy, still laced with the faint trace of his cologne. I hovered there, uncertain, before retreating, my heart hammering as I retreated into the sanctuary of my own room. There was a subtle absurdity in the way I circled the rooms, drawn always to the edges of where he might be. Every shared space had become a minefield of possibility. The rest of the morning I lost myself in mundane chores, scrubbing the counters, rearranging the spice rack, organizing old receipts that should have been thrown away months ago. I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed, that yesterday was only an anomaly, a fluke, a momentary lapse that could be folded away and forgotten. But I knew better. I felt it every time my thoughts drifted back to that kiss. Every time I caught myself looking for signs, a shoe in the hallway, a book on the armrest, the sound of laughter from the garden. Sometime after noon, I heard his voice floating in from the backyard, deep and careless as he talked on the phone. I watched through the kitchen window as he paced near the flower beds, sunlight catching on his hair. He looked completely at ease, as if nothing extraordinary had passed between us. That calmness made me ache, resentful and relieved at once. Was he already moving on, or was he simply better at hiding the chaos inside? The afternoon passed in fragments. I busied myself with preparing lunch, hands moving automatically, while my mind raced in circles. He appeared at the doorway just as I was slicing tomatoes, offering to help. I handed him the bread, our fingers brushing again. This time, both of us froze for a breath before moving on. The kitchen filled with the normal sounds of daily life. The scrape of a knife, the rattle of a plate, but each movement felt heavy, with meaning, as if we were speaking a secret language no one else could hear. We sat at the table eating in silence, both pretending the world outside was unchanged. I glanced up and found him watching me, his expression unreadable. The air between us throbbed with things unsaid. After a few moments, he broke the silence. "Is this weird for you?" he asked, his tone light but his gaze unwavering. The question hung between us, sharper than it should have been. I hesitated, then shook my head, forcing a laugh. "No, just different. It's been a long time since the house felt this full." The truth was hidden beneath the surface, unspoken but understood. He nodded, and the conversation drifted to safer topics. His plans for work, my neglected garden, the weather, anything that would fill the silence and keep us from spiraling back toward that moment at the lake. But the memory of it pulsed in my veins, impossible to forget. After lunch, he offered to clean up. I let him, grateful for the excuse to escape. But even in my room, I could feel the gravitational pull of his presence in the kitchen. By late afternoon, my husband returned, filling the house with his familiar rhythm. The day fell back into routine, but I was acutely aware of how my body moved through space, how I turned away from my husband's touch just a fraction too quickly, how my eyes drifted to the guest room whenever I thought no one was looking. That evening, as I sat in the living room folding laundry, my phone buzzed with a new message. I hesitated before opening it, glancing over my shoulder out of habit. It was from him, a photograph, snapped in secret. Me, in the kitchen, sunlight, falling across my hair, caught in a moment of unguarded laughter. My breath caught. There was no message attached, just the image, but it said everything. The implications of it, his gaze lingering, his desire captured in that shuttered second, sent a rush of heat to my cheeks. Later, as my husband and I watched television together, I felt like an imposter in my own life. I leaned into his side, pretending comfort, while my thoughts wandered elsewhere. He asked if I wanted to go away for a weekend together, just the two of us. I hesitated, searching for an answer that would not sound like a rejection. I agreed, but my mind was already miles away, tangled in memories of a kiss that should not have happened, and a hunger for something I couldn't name. When night finally fell and the house quieted, I lay awake listening for every sound. The faint hum of the guest room lamp, the creak of the stairs, the shifting weight of someone moving through the hallway. The tension was a living thing, weaving itself through my nerves, making it impossible to rest. I pressed my face into the pillow, breathing in the scent of lavender and regret, and wondered how long I could keep moving along this knife's edge, pretending nothing had changed, when everything inside me had already shifted. As sleep, finally, pulled me under, I clung to the memory of that secret message, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the invisible thread that bound us, the certainty that whatever happened next, it would not be denied. The following morning, a dull ache lingered beneath my collarbone, as if my body knew before my mind could catch up that something essential had shifted. I moved carefully through my rituals: shower, coffee, tidying up, the kitchen, grateful for the mechanical predictability of each action. My husband was already awake, making arrangements for the day with an air of unusual anticipation. As I listened to him on the phone, snatches of his conversation drifted into the room, weekend, countryside, all of us together. His tone was eager, almost boyish, the promise of a spontaneous escape animating his features. We could drive up after lunch, just the three of us. It's been so long since we did anything together. He looked at me with hopefulness, searching for a reaction. I matched his smile, keeping the restlessness in my chest hidden. I agreed, knowing I could not refuse, and feeling the tension coil tighter inside me. Packing for a family trip had once been an exercise in routine. Practical shoes, sweaters for the evening chill, snacks for the car ride. This time, I hesitated over each item, lingering too long in front of my closet. My hands grazed the lace of the new green lingerie, and for a moment I considered leaving it behind. But the thought of that fabric against my skin, of how my body felt wrapped in something meant to be seen, was irresistible. I tucked it into my overnight bag, beneath a stack of sensible clothes. The car ride out of the city was marked by small talk and stretches of silence that seemed to hum with electricity. My husband drove, narrating the passing landscape with nostalgic affection, but my attention kept drifting to the rearview mirror, to the reflection of the man behind me, his face turned toward the window, lips pressed into a thoughtful line. He caught my gaze once and held it a beat too long before looking away, a silent acknowledgement that did nothing to cool the current between us. We arrived in the late afternoon at a rented cottage on the edge of a wooded park. The air was heavy, with the scent of pine and the slow promise of summer rain. My husband set about unloading the car with his usual efficiency, assigning tasks to each of us: groceries to the kitchen, linens to the bedrooms. The smallness of the space made every movement significant. In the cramped hallway, I brushed past him, my bare arm grazing his, a touch so fleeting it might have been accidental if not for the way we both froze, just for an instant. As we settled in, I found myself hypersensitive to every detail. The uneven boards underfoot, the faint echo of footsteps between rooms, the way his voice carried through the thin walls. The cottage had 2 bedrooms and a fold-out couch in the living room. My husband insisted I take the larger room for comfort, volunteering himself for the couch. Pleased by his own selflessness, he seemed oblivious to the web of glances and half-finished sentences that stitched the afternoon together. Dinner was simple: bread, cheese, a salad of early tomatoes. We ate at the small kitchen table, plates balanced on our knees, laughing at stories from my husband's youth. If there was any strain in my voice or tension in my smile, no one commented. But beneath the surface, the 3 of us orbited one another in an intricate silent dance, each gesture layered with meaning. After dinner, my husband suggested a walk along the river that wound behind the cottage. Rain threatened but never fell, and the air was thick with possibility. We walked in single file, him ahead, and then, as if by silent agreement, his son and I fell behind. The path narrowed, forcing us closer, our hands almost brushing in the dusk. I could feel the warmth of him, the pulse in my own wrist thrumming wildly. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, so quietly that my husband, already rounding the bend ahead, could not hear. The question startled me, but I didn't answer, letting the silence stretch. My mind flickered with images. The green lace in my bag, his mouth on, mine in the park, the secret photograph I still hadn't deleted. Back at the cottage, night fell with sudden completeness. My husband, tired from the drive and the wine, fell asleep quickly on the couch, his rhythmic breathing audible through the closed door. I sat alone at the small desk in the bedroom, the glow of my phone the only light. I scrolled through photos, my thumb hovering over the image he'd sent me, the one where I was laughing, unguarded, sunlight tangled in my hair. I wanted to respond, to say something that would shatter the fragile truce of our family, but I could not find the words. A tap at the door startled me. I hesitated before answering, my breath catching as he slipped silently inside. He didn't speak, just crossed the room to stand at the window, looking out into the darkness. The air between us was thick, charged with everything unspoken. He turned, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, it was as if we were the only two people in the world. He held out his hand, not as a demand, but an offering, a plea for connection. In the hush of the night, I shook my head, not trusting my voice, but I didn't move away. "Nothing about this is simple," he said finally. "But I can't pretend anymore." I searched his face for anger, for accusation, but found only longing mirrored back at me. "Neither can I whispered, barely audible, and the words seemed to hang between us, a vow and a confession, all at once. He slipped out as quietly as he'd entered, leaving me alone in the soft light, my heart thudding so hard I was afraid it would wake the entire house. The green lace in my bag felt suddenly heavy, charged with intent. I changed for bed in the dark, every movement deliberate, as if each gesture could shape the future. As I lay down, I listened to the sounds of the cottage, the creak of floorboards, the distant rush of the river, the steady breathing of the man I had promised to love, and the footsteps of the man I could not bring myself to resist. I felt myself poised on the edge of something vast and unknown, the safe boundaries of my life dissolving into the shadows, and for the first time, I did not turn away. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the storm gathering just beyond the walls, and waited, trembling, for whatever would come next. The night in the cottage was dense, the kind that settles on the skin and lingers in the lungs. I lay awake far longer than I wanted, listening for sounds beyond my own breathing. The soft sighs of a sleeping house, the distant hush of wind in the pines, footsteps that never quite materialized outside my door. My husband's snores floated down the hallway in steady intervals, a living reminder of the world I was betraying, but my thoughts spun elsewhere, backwards and forwards, tangled in longing and dread. Sometime past midnight, a tremor of restlessness overtook me. The cottage walls seemed to press in, the air inside thick with humidity and unspoken words. I got up quietly, careful not to disturb anyone, and tiptoed across the creaking floorboards to the bathroom, hoping a splash of cold water would clear my head. As I closed the door behind me, I glimpsed my reflection in the mirror, a woman caught between desire and shame, her hair rumpled, her eyes too bright. When I returned to the hallway, I noticed a faint glow beneath the door of the smaller bedroom. My pulse flickered. For a moment, I hesitated, torn between returning to the safety of my own bed and yielding to the pull of something stronger. I didn't need to knock. The door opened with a whisper, as if expecting me. He was awake, seated at the edge of the bed, the light from his phone illuminating the lines of his face. He looked up, and in the hush between us, no words were necessary. We were past the point of pretending not to understand. I closed the door behind me. The smallness of the room made everything more immediate. His breath, my trembling hands, the shared certainty that this moment was as inevitable as the rain that had begun tapping softly on the window. He stood and crossed the space between us in 2 strides. For a heartbeat, we hovered in hesitation, our eyes locked, and then the dam broke. His mouth found mine in a kiss that was both apology and promise, urgent and devastatingly gentle. There was no choreography to it, no practiced seduction, only the raw honesty of wanting what could not be denied. I responded without thought, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, memorizing the heat of his skin, the tension in his shoulders. We broke apart only long enough to breathe. He pressed his forehead to mine, his voice rough with need. "I keep trying to stop, but I can't," he whispered. And in the fragile dark, I understood. I couldn't either. We didn't speak of the consequences. They lived all around us, woven into the thin walls, into the possibility that a single misstep could shatter everything. In that small room, every sound was dangerous. A floorboard creaking, the storm intensifying outside, the uneven rhythm of our hearts. I felt the weight of my wedding ring, cold against my skin, and for a moment I faltered, guilt pressing like a stone against my ribs. But his hands were warm, steadying, and I let myself lean into him, allowing need to drown out reason. There was no question of staying until morning. We both knew the limits of our secrecy. After a while, I pulled away, the reality of what we'd done settling over us in the heavy silence. He didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't want to go, but the unspoken rules demanded we return to our separate worlds before anyone could wake. I slipped back down the hallway, every nerve burning, bracing myself for the icy clarity of my own bed. I barely slept. Dawn crept in through the curtains, pale and merciless. I dressed in silence, careful to erase any sign of what had happened, hiding the green lace deep beneath my other clothes, my skin tingling where he had touched me. My husband stirred as I entered the kitchen, blinking sleep from his eyes, oblivious to the storm still raging inside me. He poured us both coffee, talking about plans for a hike after breakfast, his voice a dull percussion in the background. I nodded, answering where I had to, but my mind kept slipping away, chasing the memory of the night, the echo of lips and hands and words whispered in the dark. I caught his son's gaze across the table once, and in that instant, everything that had passed between us flashed in a silent code neither of us could hide. The day moved forward, a series of careful performances. We followed the hiking trail my husband chose, winding through forests heavy with last night's rain. The path was slippery in places, and once, as I faltered on a muddy patch, it was his son who caught my arm, steadying me with a grip that lingered half a second too long. My husband laughed, thanking him, and I forced a smile, my pulse thrumming with the memory of how those hands had held me hours earlier. The rest of the weekend played out with a terrible, beautiful intensity. Glances stolen when no one else was looking, touches disguised as accidents, conversations heavy with everything unsaid. My husband, content in his own world, never noticed the careful dance taking place beside him. That night, as the three of us sat around the fire outside, I watched the shifting play of light on their faces. My husband recounted stories from their family holidays, his voice bright with nostalgia. I added my laughter when required, answering questions, asking my own, but I was 1,000 miles away, my heart beating to a secret rhythm. When he finally fell asleep in his chair, I lingered for a few moments longer, the flames casting fleeting shadows on our hands as we reached for the same stick, the same glass, the same moment of silent understanding. Later, alone in bed, I replayed every second of the night, every word and touch and glance. Shame and longing warred inside me, but neither could overwhelm the simple, brutal truth. I did not want this to end. I craved more, not just the stolen hours, but the risk, the electricity, the wild hope that something in my life could still ignite. And as the fire burned low outside and the night settled over the cottage, I knew I would find a way to see him again, no matter the cost. The return home from the countryside felt anticlimactic, a slow withdrawal from a fever dream. The car was quieter than usual, fatigue settling over us like dust. My husband, content and oblivious, hummed along to the radio, occasionally commenting on the scenery, a new construction site, a memory sparked by a roadside cafe. I let his words wash over me, nodding when needed, my mind drifting in and out, a focus fixed on the memory of the night I'd barely slept, and the man in the back seat whose presence I felt acutely even when my eyes were elsewhere. Unpacking at home brought a dull ache of disappointment. The familiar rooms closed in around me, as if the walls themselves knew I had returned carrying a secret too heavy to bear. I buried the green lace deep in the laundry basket, careful not to meet my own reflection in the mirror. I moved about the house in practiced silence, restoring order to chaos, folding and smoothing, seeking solace in repetition. My husband was cheerful, recounting the highlights of our trip over dinner, suggesting we plan something similar for the autumn. He praised me for packing well, for remembering the insect repellent, for making the cottage feel like home. His gratitude was a gentle weight pressing on my conscience. That night, as I slid into bed beside him, I felt a gulf between our bodies, as if we were separated by oceans, not mere inches. His hand found my waist beneath the blankets, his touch, familiar, careful. He pressed his lips to my shoulder, a routine gesture, and waited. I hesitated, acutely aware of the rhythm of my own breath, my heart thudding with guilt and confusion. I turned toward him, meeting his eyes in the half-dark. For a moment, I tried to lose myself in him, to let his touch ground me, to remind myself what loyalty was supposed to feel like. But as his hands moved, I realized I was performing a role, responding when I should, echoing the sounds he expected, letting my body move through the motions with a practiced ease that bordered on cruelty. My mind slipped away, unspooling memories of the cottage, of a different set of hands, a different heat. Shame chased desire in dizzying circles. When it was over, he stroked my hair, murmured something about how much he loved these quiet moments together. I pressed my face to his chest and wished I could feel the same. In the days that followed, the tension in the house ebbed and surged, never fully disappearing. He, my husband, grew softer, more attentive, bringing home flowers from the market, surprising me with lunch dates, asking more questions about my day than usual. I tried to match his efforts, afraid that any sign of indifference would betray me. I kissed him in the kitchen, lingered at the breakfast table, accepted his hand in public, all the while feeling a widening crack beneath the surface of my life. His son moved through the house with a quiet intensity, his presence now a constant ache. He rarely lingered in the same room as me for long, but when he did, the air between us thickened, a silent charge passing back and forth. Sometimes I would find a note on the kitchen counter, nothing incriminating, just a scribbled joke about the terrible coffee, or a reminder that we needed more eggs. But every note felt like a secret message, a private joke only we understood. One afternoon, as I stood at the window watching rain trace patterns on the glass, he appeared at my side, so quietly I hadn't heard his approach. For a long moment, we both stared outside, pretending to focus on the weather. He cleared his throat. "You're not sleeping well," he said softly. I tensed, uncertain if he was making an accusation or an observation. "I'm fine," I lied, not trusting myself to elaborate. I wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, but the distance between us was both physical and necessary. He looked at me, eyes narrowed in concern and something darker. "We can't go on like this," he said, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I opened my mouth to answer, but my husband's voice called from the hallway, shattering the spell. That evening, as I set the table for dinner, the three of us danced a careful waltz of avoidance. My husband, buoyed by his newfound enthusiasm for family togetherness, proposed a weekend at the coast. I agreed too quickly, afraid that hesitance would raise suspicion. His son excused himself before dessert, leaving me to scrub plates in silence, my hands trembling with longing and frustration. Later, in the privacy of my bedroom, I replayed every interaction in my mind, each accidental touch, each unfinished sentence, the taste of confession on my tongue. I ached for him, not just for his body, but for the intensity he summoned in me, the sense that I was seen, known, desired. I wondered how long we could maintain this fragile charade, how long before someone saw through the cracks. One night I heard footsteps outside my door. I sat up in bed, breath held, willing myself to stay where I was. The steps paused, then moved away. I pressed my hand to my chest, willing my heartbeat to slow, and wondered what would happen if either of us ever stopped running. As the days passed, the tension grew, a storm gathering on the horizon, promising upheaval. I knew I could not remain in this liminal space forever. I wanted to belong to myself again, to claim desire without guilt, to choose without fear. But for now, I played my part, smiled when expected, and carried my secret like a living ember, burning quietly beneath the surface of everything I touched. Somewhere, along the weeks that followed, the fabric of our lives grew thinner, stretched to the point of translucency. The boundaries I'd once relied upon, roles, routines, the neat compartments of wife, stepmother, hostess, blurred in the relentless pressure of what we hid. Nothing dramatic happened at first. The world around us moved with the same predictability. My husband's keys jangling in the bowl by the door, the soft click of his son's shoes in the hallway, the kettle whistling in the kitchen. But beneath the sameness, a low hum of danger persisted. I lived in a state of constant anticipation, waiting for a slip, a sign, some crack that would expose us. The smallest things began to betray me. I lost track of the present, forgetting where I'd left my keys or what day it was or which story I'd told to whom. I found myself studying his son's face for cues. Was he as unraveled as I was, or simply better at hiding it? Sometimes he'd catch my gaze and hold it, letting something fierce and desperate flicker there before dropping his eyes. Those silent exchanges became our only intimacy, a language no one else could read. On a Thursday evening, my husband announced that we would be hosting friends for dinner. He wanted to celebrate some minor work triumph and insisted on inviting a handful of colleagues and their spouses. The house filled with the scent of roasting vegetables and clinking glasses. I floated through the preparations, performing my hostess duties, smiling until my cheeks ached. The dining room glowed with laughter and candlelight. At the table, my husband sat at one end, regaling the group with stories. His son claimed a spot across from me, their banter easy, practiced. Throughout the evening, I felt his gaze on me in small, sharp moments. As I poured wine, as I refilled the breadbasket, as I laughed a little too loudly at someone's joke. The others were oblivious, swept up in the buoyant energy, but attention coiled beneath every glance, every accidental brush of fingers as dishes were passed. At one point, I leaned in to whisper to my husband and caught a flash of jealousy in his son's eyes, gone in a heartbeat but unmistakable. After dessert, as the guests lingered in the living room, his son helped me clear the table. Alone in the kitchen, he leaned close and spoke just above a whisper. "How much longer can you keep this up?" His voice trembled. Anger, pain, desire, all vying for space. I froze, knuckles white on a stack of plates. "I don't know," I admitted. "I keep telling myself it will end, that I'll stop wanting." My words died. The clatter of laughter in the next room felt suddenly threatening, like the ticking of a bomb. He shook his head. "It's not just you. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I see you with him." He broke off, swallowing the rest. We stared at each other, time compressed between us until the spell broke with the sound of someone approaching. I turned, pasted on my smile, and walked back to the party as if nothing had happened, as if my entire world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Later that night, when the house had emptied and my husband had gone to bed, I lingered in the hallway, listening for the sound of movement from his son's room. I didn't dare go to him, but the longing pulsed in my veins, urgent and raw. I returned to my own room, undressed in the dark, and lay awake for hours, haunted by the echo of his voice. The following day, my husband seemed distracted, his affection tinged with suspicion. At breakfast, he watched me more closely than usual, his questions too pointed, his touch a little too careful. I wondered if he'd begun to sense the fracture, if the tension between his wife and his son had finally breached the surface. I felt exposed, every movement suddenly significant, every word a potential confession. That afternoon, I found a book in our bedroom that didn't belong to either of us, a novel I'd seen in his son's hands earlier that week. My husband noticed it too. "Did you borrow this?" he asked. The question was casual, but his eyes lingered on me, searching for something I couldn't name. "No," I replied, forcing my voice steady. "Maybe he left it by accident." He nodded, but the conversation hung unfinished between us. Later, at dinner, his son made some offhand comment about the upcoming weekend, referencing the dinner party, the guests, the jokes. He teased me about my cooking, his tone light but his eyes daring me to reveal more. My husband laughed, missing the tension that electrified the air. Under the table, I clenched my fists, my whole body humming with the knowledge that we were on the edge of being found out. After dinner, as the men cleared the plates and I wiped down the counter, I caught his son watching me with a mixture of pain and challenge in his expression. For a moment, I wanted to drop everything, cross the room, and take his face in my hands, to promise him that none of this was for nothing, that I wasn't just a coward hiding behind circumstance. But I didn't move. That night, lying next to my husband, I realized how precarious everything had become. One careless mistake, one slip of the tongue, and our secret would unravel. Yet, despite the fear, the uncertainty, I felt more alive than I had in years. Every day had become a question without an answer. Every night, a quiet war between longing and restraint. I knew then that something had to give. The choice, when it finally arrived, would not be neat or painless. And in the dark, as my husband's breathing steadied beside me, I wondered if I'd ever again be able to choose peace over fire. The days after the dinner party unraveled in fragments, each one edged with exhaustion and anticipation. I felt as if I were living through an endless dress rehearsal, every gesture, every word, a careful performance. The weight of what I was hiding from my husband pressed on my shoulders, but the prospect of losing what I had found with his son terrified me more. I moved through the house like a ghost, simultaneously wishing to be invisible and desperately hoping to be seen by the one person I could not safely reach. I noticed my husband's attempts to reclaim our marriage, subtle at first, then increasingly persistent. He planned another weekend away, this time just for us, a return to the coast where we'd once celebrated an anniversary. He left travel brochures on the kitchen table, made reservations at our favorite seaside restaurant, and left, me little notes in my purse. Let's try to find each other again. The guilt was unbearable, a physical ache in my chest, yet I found myself incapable of true enthusiasm. My smile never reached my eyes. I responded to his touch, his words, with the right amount of warmth and gratitude, but inside I was a tightly coiled spring, vibrating with a restlessness I could not share. His son and I saw less of each other, not by choice, but by necessity. He became quieter at meals, retreating early to his room or vanishing for hours on solitary walks. When our paths did cross, the glances were brief, cautious, words no longer enough to contain what we felt. Once, while clearing the table, our hands brushed. I looked up, and the raw longing in his eyes nearly undid me. I wanted to ask him to stay, to demand some kind of resolution, but the words wouldn't come. Everything between us seemed suspended, waiting for a moment that might never arrive. One evening, unable to bear the tension, I slipped outside after dinner, letting the back door sigh closed behind me. The garden was thick with the scent of blooming night flowers, the air cool on my arms. I paced the length of the patio, the quiet pressing in. I heard the soft crunch of gravel behind me and turned to see him standing at the edge of the light, hands in his pockets, face shadowed but intent. We didn't speak at first. He came to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat, radiating from his body. For a long while, we watched the clouds drift across the night sky, the silence between us dense and complicated. Finally, he broke it. I can't keep doing this, living around you, pretending it's nothing. His voice was barely more than a whisper, raw with need and regret. I swallowed hard, struggling to match his honesty. I don't know how to stop, I admitted. But I can't give you what you want. I can't destroy everything. He shook his head, frustration and grief tangled in his expression. I'm not asking you to destroy anything. He faltered, then looked away. I just want to know if any of it meant something to you. The question cut deeper than I expected. I turned to him, searching for words that could bridge the chasm. It meant everything. But I'm lost. I don't know how to find a way forward, and I'm terrified that if I try, I'll lose both of you. He looked at me, searching for hope or resolution, but there was none to give. After a moment, he stepped back, his shoulders bowed in defeat. Maybe it's better if I go for a while, he said, his tone resigned. Panic flared. Don't, I said, reaching for his hand, but he gently pulled away. I can't stay here, not like this. He hesitated, then added, but I don't want to lose you completely. If you ever decide, if you ever want. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. He turned and slipped into the darkness, leaving me standing in the hush of the garden, the night air suddenly colder. The next day, my husband announced over breakfast that his son was going to visit a friend in another city for a few weeks. He explained it casually, but I caught the way he studied my face as he spoke, searching for a reaction I tried desperately to hide. I managed a small nod, a neutral smile, but inside, I was unraveling. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier than I could have imagined. My husband and I moved through the routines of our marriage, both of us trying to pretend we hadn't noticed the shift. At night, lying awake, I replayed the conversation in the garden, the pain in his voice, the aching truth that desire alone is never enough to sustain or protect. I tried to re-immerse myself in my old life, grocery shopping, phone calls with friends, exercise classes, dinners with my husband, but nothing quite fit. Everything felt slightly askew, as if I were living in a version of my life from which something essential had been quietly stolen. Even the affection my husband offered felt distant, as though it were intended for a woman I no longer knew how to be. One afternoon, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the outline of my hands beneath the water, and realized I was crying, not just for what I had lost, but for the woman I had become. I wasn't sure which grief was sharper. As summer drifted toward its end, I understood that I had reached a kind of crisis. I could no longer keep running from my choices or from the consequences of my longing. I would have to decide what it meant to be true to myself, if there was any such thing left to claim. And as the sky darkened outside and the garden pressed close to the window, I felt a strange, quiet clarity begin to settle. Nothing would ever be the same again. And whatever path I chose next, it would be one I'd have to walk alone. Time passed, unevenly in the aftermath, sometimes hurtling forward in panicked bursts, sometimes stalling so completely I thought the world had forgotten me altogether. The house settled into a hollow quiet after his son left, a silence punctuated by the soft drone of the refrigerator and the muted clatter of my husband's daily routines. I walked through our rooms in the mornings, touching familiar objects, as if they could tether me to the woman I'd been before. The pillows on the living room sofa, the chipped mug on the kitchen shelf, the faded scarf draped over the banister. Each item held a weight, a history, but none of them offered comfort. If anything, they were evidence of a life that had slipped out of my grasp, transformed by what I'd allowed and what I'd lost. My husband noticed my distraction, though he never named it. He grew more distant, not with anger, but with a gentle reserve, as if he too sensed the space between us widening and could not bear to push against it. He still asked after my day, still brought home small offerings from the market, but his efforts felt obligatory, acts of habit rather than desire. Our evenings together became rituals performed in silence, television flickering in the background, two bodies sharing a sofa, but rarely meeting each other's eyes. Sometimes I caught him watching me, uncertainty flickering across his face, and I wanted to reach for him, to apologize for the fracture I had brought into our home. But every time, the words dried up before they reached my lips. I was tired of apologies that could change nothing. I threw myself into new distractions. I started volunteering at the library, took up pottery classes at the community center, joined a book club. The effort to fill my days was exhausting, but I couldn't stand the empty stretches of unoccupied time when memory crept in with the force of a storm. I saw his son's face everywhere, in the shadowed corner of the supermarket, in the shape of a man's shoulders across the street, in the memory of laughter echoing down the hallway. I kept my phone near me at all times, reading old messages, sometimes drafting new ones I never sent. I learned how hope could ache, sharp and persistent, refusing to fade even as the days without him piled into weeks. Occasionally, my husband suggested we take a trip, start fresh somewhere else, but I always found a reason to stay. Moving wouldn't change what had happened, and running from the past only made its shape sharper in the dark. I clung to the small freedoms I had left. A quiet morning in the garden, a solo walk by the river, the luxury of not having to answer anyone's questions. Sometimes, when I found a moment alone, I would close my eyes and remember the feeling of his son's hand on my skin, the wild certainty that, for a brief and terrible time, I had been alive in a way that frightened me. One rainy afternoon, months after he left, I returned home to find an envelope tucked inside the mailbox. There was no name, only my address written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of me, taken in the garden, sunlight caught in my hair, eyes closed as if I was dreaming. There was nothing written on the back. I stared at the image for a long time, feeling a wave of longing so intense I thought I might drown in it. It wasn't a promise or even a farewell. It was simply a reminder that what had passed between us was real, that I had been seen and remembered. The photograph became my secret talisman. I slipped it into the back of a drawer, hidden beneath old letters and receipts, but I returned to it often. When the house was quiet and the ache inside me grew unbearable, I would sit on the edge of my bed and trace the outline of my own face, trying to recognize the woman I had become. Some days she felt like a stranger. Others, she was the only version of myself I trusted. My husband and I learned to coexist, a gentle truce that kept the peace but offered little solace. We shared meals, small talk, the pretense of a life rebuilt. There were nights when he reached for me in the darkness, and I let him, willing myself to respond, to remember what intimacy had once felt like. But always, some part of me remained elsewhere, adrift in memories that refused to fade. I mourned the simplicity I would never reclaim, the innocence lost in the wake of desire. And yet, as the seasons changed and the days grew longer, I discovered a kind of fragile hope, a new honesty with myself, if not with anyone else. I could not undo what I had done, nor could I pretend to be unchanged. I began to allow myself a future unbound by the weight of regret, a future shaped not by what I had lost, but by what I had learned to survive. In the end, life did not offer neat resolutions or happy endings. The pain softened, but it never truly disappeared. I carried it with me like a second skin, a private map of longing and loss. Sometimes in the quietest hours before dawn, I would close my eyes and remember, not with shame, but with a fierce gratitude for the days when I had risked everything to feel alive, even if only for a little while. And I understood, finally, that surviving was its own kind of triumph, even if happiness would always remain just out of reach.